The Certified Professional in Training Management Credential, or CPTM, is designed to convey the essential competencies you need to manage a training organization. When you become a CPTM, you gain access to alumni resources like monthly peer roundtables and a full registration to the Training Industry Conference and Expo. If you start today, you could earn the CPTM credential in as little as 2 months. To learn more, visit www.trainingindustry.com/CPTM.
Welcome to the Business of Learning, the Learning Leaders podcast from Training Industry, where we speak with industry experts and thought leaders on all things learning and development.
Hi, welcome back to the Business of Learning. I'm Michelle Eggleston-Schwartz, Editor-in-Chief here at Training Industry.
And I'm Sarah Gallo, Senior Editor. I'm excited to be here for our first recording of 2026. And to kick off this year, we're sitting down with Rashi Kakkar, Global Portfolio Leader, Leadership and Development at McKinsey's Leadership Center of Excellence to discuss product management principles and how they can help guide your L&D strategy. So Rashi, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited about the conversation. And to kind of kick things off, I would just love to hear from your view. What are the biggest similarities between how product managers operate and how L&D teams should operate when developing and managing learning programs?
Yeah, and I think maybe the good place to start is also just defining what a product is, right? When people hear the word product, I think there's this confusion as to what it really is. And if you really sort of think about a product, it is a bundle of value. It could be tangible, intangible, that solves a customer's problems, right? Or their needs. And so if you really think about it, right, a product really is what L&D services or provides to the business, right? It could be in different sort of forms. It could be training, it could be job aids, it could be sort of, AI tools, etc. And so once you understand that, we are in the business of actually providing services to the business, you understand that there are a lot of similarities between the word of product management and the principles there and L&D, right? So I think, as you said, what are some of the similarities? I think the first big similarity to me, at least, is this like provider of service, creator of value, which means you are not, support, you're not somebody in the background, but you're more strategic. You're someone who's actually responsible for driving impact and solving sort of tangible, intangible wants, needs of these end customers. So the way I think about L&D functions, and I think where you can draw sort of parallels and similarities from product managers, is you're almost like, the R&D or the research and development lab for your people. And if your people are products that are creating value for your business, then you are sort of the product managers who are helping enhance, these folks and helping drive some business growth, innovation, value. So that's sort of the similarities and parallels. And I think it starts by recognizing and understanding that we are in the business of providing services and value, which leads to strategic sort of unlocks.
Definitely. Thanks for kind of sharing some of those similarities. I think that'll be really helpful in just framing our conversation today. And with that, can you dive a little bit deeper into what specifically L&D professionals can learn from product managers about taking a more strategic and business-first approach to training, design, and delivery?
Yeah. So I think good product managers do a couple of things, right? One, like I said, they drive and deliver business impact. They marshal resources together. And they also are constantly identifying and solving the needs of their customers, right? And so I think what this really means is, I guess three things in my classic consulting style. One is you are strategic. You do drive value for the business. You do something, product managers do this very well. It's called continuous discovery, right? So the idea is, understanding the needs of your learners, your users, your customers is not a one-off thing that happens at the start of a project or at the start of, even a quarter, but it's something that you're doing constantly, right? Like, how do you constantly stay in touch with the people whose needs you're serving so that you can always sort of tinker and improve your interventions, and you can always see, hey, look, these are their sort of needs, we're solving it. And these are emerging needs that we're discovering through this process of continuous discovery that need to be solved, right? And so in a lot of ways, you're constantly in the business of understanding, your own sort of internal company's operations, the businesses, like what are the levers, how do all the different teams interact? And you also, at the same time, have a good sense of the market, right? Like who are our competitors? What is our industry? What is changing there? So that we can constantly keep delivering those sort of interventions, etc., to our people, right? And so I think the one difference I always like telling people who come from the world of L&D, and I sort of pivoted into L&D from a world of product management, is the difference between product versus project. I think in L&D, a lot of us function a lot in this project sort of a world, which was very sort of waterfall. There'd be a start date, end date. Someone would give you requirements. You'd go into a black box, develop it, to kind of throw it across the wall at some, and then move on to the next project, right? So a project has this like finite stop start, and a product really is something that never finishes, right? So a product, think of it as Instagram, right? It never finishes. There are product managers who are focusing on the newsfeed, who are focusing on the chat functionality. And so you spend your entire sort of day thinking about, are we meeting the needs of these people, right? Are we marshaling the right resources? Are we solving the right problems? So I think, to your point, like what is it that they can learn? I think learning how to be, this idea of continuous discovery, always knowing the needs of the people you're serving. Before someone comes and gives you requirements, you actually go tell them, hey, look, we're so close to these individuals. We know what's happening in the company and in the broader ecosystem, that we feel ABC things would be helpful, right? It's doing that. And then having this mindset of, it's not a one and done thing. Like, I own the outcome. And so if today I launch something, I'm going to check the results. I'm going to look at the measurements. I'm going to see if the actual impact is being realized. If not, we're going to keep sort of tinkering it, right? It's not this thing that someone told me to do, I did it, and I went into, item number 2 of my backlog. Not really, right? Like, you own sort of the end outcome. And then how you do it is this tools. It's the owning the, why is this important to me? What value is it going to unlock for our business?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I love how you kind of broke that down of thinking of training as a project. It does kind of seem like one and done. When you kind of view it as a product, it's this continuous learning experience that we know learning is. It's a journey. It never ends. And so kind of having that mindset, I think, is really important. Thinking of learners as our customers is really important, and it's really key in product management, this idea of customer centricity. How can L&D apply that same mindset where they think of their learners as customers to better meet business and learner needs?
Yeah. So I think one of the points I already raised, I'm not going to talk about that a lot, is this idea of continuous discovery, right? It's almost like, if you're an L&D team, depending on, whatever the size of your team, like, how do you break the team down, where the way you have product managers who sort of own parts of the product or parts of the journey, right? How do you sort of, if your entire employee life cycle is a journey from onboarding all the way till they leave, or how they progress in an organization, how do you get people in your team to sort of own big chunks of that journey, right? So someone owns, say, onboarding, someone owns early career development, someone owns like the manager layer, someone owns executive. And then how do these people constantly stay in touch with the business and are understanding the needs, right? So the idea of, like, I think continuous discovery is very helpful, where you've always got, let's just say, relationships, etc., with the business. I think the second thing that a lot of product managers do very well is this idea of dog fooding. And what dog fooding really means is kind of tasting your own creation in a way. And what this really means is, instead of you building an intervention and throwing it, right, how do you go and actually experience it? How do you have someone from your team experience it from the way a customer would experience it for the first time, or your learners would, right? And so this means you actually go and sit down, if you are part of an enablement function, a sales enablement function, right? You go actually sit down with the BDRs, AEs, and see what their day-to-day looks like. See if your tool you've created or the training you've created actually helps them, right? So this idea of dog fooding, actually tasting what you created, I think is very helpful with this whole customer centricity. And then the last thing really is caring about the outcomes, right? So the outcome is not, I got a training module created. That's not success. The outcome is, I led to the business goal, right? So again, with the sales example, if you're trying to train, say, sales reps, the outcome for an L&D manager is not, hey, I got this great like sales training. It's to say, did it actually lead to a bump in whatever it is that we were tracking, right? If it's like BDRs, did it actually lead to a bump in the number of calls they set up from me? If it's AEs, did it actually help, 10% of them close their quotas every quarter, etc. So I think all that together helps enhance customer centricity, and good product managers do that, where they don't think of their job as we do a bunch of things and it's done. For them, it's like, I know what my customers need. I know it before anybody else tells me. I'm constantly tinkering and making sure, what they need is getting sort of serviced. And most importantly, is it leading to the right outcomes, right? And if it's not, kind of going back with this experimentation mindset, saying our hypothesis was training was the right answer, but actually it was not training. We tried it and it didn't lead to the outcomes, and the right answer is something else. It could be a job, it could be, it could be the entire sort of culture in the team needs to change.
Yeah, I think those are such great points. Like, it's not just about, hey, I delivered this course as an outcome, but hey, here's how this course I delivered led to improved performance, which supported this business priority. That's huge. And of course, not easy to do. It's a common challenge we often hear from our listeners and our readers. So I'd love if you could share a little bit more about how adopting product management principles like road mapping or prioritization frameworks can kind of help bridge that gap.
Yeah, so again, road mapping, prioritization frameworks, and a bunch of these tools, etc. I think are really important. But I think to bridge that gap, really a couple of things, right? One is skills and one is the mindset, right? We touch on the skills. I think the first and foremost is that mindset, right? How do you create that ownership mindset in L&D, and how do you make them really feel like, nobody needs to invite us to a table. We have our own strategic table and we need to invite people to it. We're drivers of business growth. So I think that's really important. And I think that starts by understanding. So a mentor once told this to me, that, the only sort of metrics that the chief executive officer at an organization, the C-suite really cares about are the CFO metrics. And attribution's really hard. Like, I get it. It's not always easy to sort of attribute things to certain interventions. But how can you, learn to read P&Ls, learn to read sort of, understand the operations of your own business. But as much as possible, how do you tie in things that you do to those CFO metrics, right? I think that really helps you become a little bit more strategic and bridges that, helps bridge that gap. And then the other thing really is going in always with a perspective, right? So the reason why there is this sort of, I guess, perception, or used to be, that L&D is like an order taker, or it's something that lags what the business needs, is because of this, project sort of mindset, where there was a backlog, there was this input requirement. Someone from the business would say, hey, we need this. And a lot of L&D people would, create the best training in the world, and then use all the instructional design principles and everything else that they know to create it and then throw it back. And that always sort of makes you an order taker and not strategic, right? So what the product management thinking does is flips it, right? You actually go to the business and say, look, we are constantly in touch with these people. We're sort of, keeping an eye on the market. These are the A, B, C shifts that are likely coming, or other needs of your people. And therefore, these are the interventions we want to create, right? What do you think about it, right? So it's a little bit of like, more than just a tool. It's that mindset shift of like, I actually own the impact, which is how do I enhance the capabilities in these human beings? How do I help them grow and develop? And then you kind of linking that back to strategic sort of business priorities, and being able to talk numbers, right? Not being afraid of like spreadsheets and number.
As a training professional, your job is to effectively manage the business of learning. You probably tune in to this podcast to gain insights on L&D trends being used by some of the most innovative thought leaders in our market. But did you know that training industry also provides data-driven analysis and best practices through our premium research reports? Our entire catalog, including reports on deconstructing 70-20-10, learner preferences, the modern learner experience, and AI's impact on L&D, just to name a few, can be found at trainingindustry.com/shop-research. New insights create new ways for L&D to do business. Let Training Industry Research Reports take your training initiatives to new heights. Go to trainingindustry.com/shop-research to view the entire catalog.
Love that. What are some of those key skills from product management that you think would be most valuable for L&D professionals who want to operate more strategically? So what skills should they be focusing on?
Yeah, so I think three big skills, right? One, like I said, so one of the big things that a product manager does is like shape the product, right? Sorry. So how do you shape the product, right? Which is, are you constantly gathering insights from your end users, from the other stakeholders? So in some cases, it could be, their managers, their bosses, from their ultimate customers, right? If you're sort of customer support reps, like they have their own customers, right? Like how are you shaping the product by harnessing the insights that come from like your users and all the stakeholders around them? And then how do you sort of build the product? You marshal the right resources, you prioritize things, you sort of take a strategic call and say, if you need to do 10 things in this quarter, like A/B is the most important. So how do you one shape the product? The second most important thing is like shipping the product, that they say, right? Like how do you make sure that high quality sort of product is shipped or delivered to your customers on time, every time? It's there are no surprises in it, and it's sort of meeting the end needs of these people and driving impact, right? And so this is the whole idea that I said of experimentation, right? Thinking it's okay to sort of ship out things that are 80% done and testing it in the market. A lot of times we go into this black box at L&D. We obviously take a lot of pride in our sort of trainings, our interventions. And so you wait till it's perfect and then you launch it. So instead of doing that, how do you sort of launch something that's 50, 60% ready and go test it out and say, this is an experiment, this is a pilot, and then get a look at that and tinker things, right? And so shipping the product is very important. And with shipping, it's equally important is like the communication, the marketing around it, right? I think a lot of sort of technologists do this where, they'll code the best sort of technology product and they'll ship it. And then they wonder, why do our customers not come, or why do people not sort of buy our product? And a lot of times, I think at L&D, we do the same thing. We'll spend a lot of energy and time on like the thing, but less time in trying to communicate it, convince people that, them sitting for this training or them sort of giving us their time and energy for these next 3 hours is going to create value for them, right? So that's the other sort of thing is like some of these basic principles of marketing, of copywriting, I think is really, really helpful is how do you ship the product, but how do you get people enticed to sort of go through that experience and help them understand the value behind whatever you've created. And then the last thing is just like synchronizing people, right? Like good product managers do that. They sort of align stakeholders. They make sure everybody has the same vision, the same goal, or everybody understands the roadmaps and the priorities and the trade-offs. And so how do you, across the organization, across all these different sort of businesses you're serving or different teams, how do you go and sort of synchronize all the people to actually create the interventions you want? So again, lots that I threw there, but if I had to just summarize it, it would be how do you shape the product, how do you ship the product, and then how do you synchronize the people?
Love that. Those are great points. I want to kind of circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which was about being an order taker. And it's kind of easy to fall into that trap, right? If we're not thinking strategically. Do you have any advice for learning leaders who do want to shift from operating as order takers to being more of those strategic business partners?
Yeah, so I know I've said a whole bunch of like, things to do. And I think that's what freaks people out because they're like, okay, now this is an entire new discipline I need to learn with its own sort of jargon and its own tools and its own sort of frameworks. I think all that's well and good, but the most important thing I'd focus on is this idea of like this ownership mindset and this idea of, you are not less than the business. Like, how do you get comfortable talking about the business so that you start showing up differently, right? And in a lot of ways, you sort of train your colleagues and you train people how to deal with you. It's like you sort of how you show up trains how people sort of see you and work with you. And so I think one of my first sort of big advice that I always give learning leaders is that, really, really like lean into your expertise, right? Like someone who works in finance has that expertise in finance, and the junior most coordinator there kind of shows up saying, look, I'm a CPA or I have this expertise, and people give them advice and input, but they can push back and say, that's all well and good, but I have done this training. I'm part of this function, and this is eventually sort of my answer. So I think the same thing in learning or in even like broader people function would need to be more comfortable doing, where everybody feels like they can do it, And it's well and good to take advice and inputs from everybody. But I think at some point telling people, look, like, you all have a perspective on how learning and development needs to happen, how talent management, people management needs to happen, all well and good. We take your input, but eventually I am the expert in this discipline. This is my day job. I spend my time thinking about it. I've kind of gone to school, focused on this, and then showing up as an expert, right? So I think that to me is the biggest sort of thing that I think a lot of people in our profession need to do. I think a lot of people join L&D functions, people functions. They're generally sort of empathetic. They generally want to help people. But I always tell people your job is not to make everybody else sort of feel good and make yourself feel miserable. Your job is to help the humans in your organization sort of, develop to the best of their capabilities and unlock impact by, people don't like calling the word resource, but that's what really is, right? Like the groups of people who work for you, how do they perform to the best of their ability so that all that growth can be unlocked and that's what your job is, and you should really lean into that expertise and sort of push back when someone's sort of kind of bullying you into doing things you don't want to do. So I think that to me is the biggest advice to shift from like order taker to strategic business partner. Like all these skills and tools are easy to learn. It's the mindset that's the hardest.
I love that. Staying focused on your learners. Before we wrap up today, I'd love for us to shift our focus towards the future. And so as learning functions evolve, what does the L&D professional of the future look like? And how might the role resemble that of a product manager?
Yeah, so I've actually done a lot of thinking about this, and I think, and this might freak some people out. And again, this is just Rashi's opinion, right? This is I speak on nobody else's behalf, but just Rashi was thinking about this. I feel like the future L&D professional will need to have like 3 big levers that they need to be very strong in. And this is where I say people will freak out. But I think one, you've got to like really understand technology inside and outside, right? You have to be able to sort of understand and speak the language that your chief digital officer, chief technology officer speaks. You've got to understand, you may not know how to build the technology or code things, but you really have to understand how to like unlock technology, right? And I think in this world of AI, etc., where there's a lot of talk about agentic workforces and humans and agents working together, you've got to not just only focus on how do you sort of upskill humans to work with technology, but maybe 10, 20 years later, the L&D folks are also figuring out how do we actually upskill these agents? How do you sort of work with the technology teams to make sure that these agents are also sort of meeting the needs of the organization the way, the people side of the workforce is, right? So I think technology is one lever you really need to understand. I think the second lever really is like understanding business, right? So exactly what your chief operating officer understands, right? Like operations, like how does this business really work? Like what business are we in? How do we make profits? What are our cost kind of drivers? What are our revenue drivers? What is the landscape that we operate in and what is changing? So really like understanding, what the chief operating officer sort of thinks about is like how does our business really work, right? And then the third thing obviously is like the L&D skills, the people skills, right? And that's an entire discipline in itself, but like how do you sort of drive people, grow people, the talent management, how do you build institutional capabilities? So to me, I really think that, we're at a very interesting inflection point where and this is why I sort of started making a career pivot when people ask me, you've come from a world of product, like why are you moving into the people space? I truly feel like the chief people officer, the chief learning officer, talent management, whatever you want to call it, I think that role, like this is the inflection point where if we all rise up to the occasion, this role becomes really, really critical in organizations. Because we are at that point where there's a lot of talk about enhancing human capabilities. How do we sort of rejig the way businesses operate with like AI coming in, etc. So to me, like a learning leader of the future really needs to not just know their own discipline, which is learning development, people management, but also add to it, sort of business learnings, things that you've learned in an MBA, plus like a little bit of tech into it. And that's where I think you then, really get your CEO's ear.
Awesome. I love that we're kind of ending on that hopeful note for the future. So with that, Rashi, thanks so much for speaking with us today. How can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to reach out?
Yeah, so I'm available on all text-based social media platforms, which means, I think still LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm on Twitter/X, I'm on Substack, I'm on Threads, Blue Sky. You can just find me on any of these platforms, my first name, last name. And yeah, that's the best sort of ways to get in touch with me. And I always love listening to folks who've got thoughts on this and perspectives. And I'd love to know what sort of resonated or if they disagree with any of this stuff. It's always fun jamming on this as an idea.
For more resources on topics like this one, check out the episode description or visit the show notes on our website at trainingindustry.com/podcast. And don't forget to rate and review us wherever you tune in to the business of learning. Until next time.